Not too long from now, we're going to get the release of the final season of Stranger Things. However, it seems it is not the end of the line for one of the most iconic franchises of the last decade. Whilst the mainline series seems to be coming to a close on New Year's Eve, in 2026 they're going to be following up with an animated midquel series named Stranger Things Tales from 85. Now, this isn't something that's completely unexpected or out of the blue, as there had been discussion and rumours about various different animated spin-off series for years, although the majority of these show rumours were completely disconnected from the mainline show, with different characters in a different location being featured. Maybe other people knew ahead of me, but the first I heard of this version of the animated spin-off series, Stranger Things Tales from 85, was a little earlier this year. I think the title was first announced in about April, and then it wasn't until the Anansi Animation Festival that we got to look at anything else with a bit of footage and a whole lot of still images. Just the other day though, we got the official announcement trailer, and yeah, judging by the comments, I think there's a lot of people that are rather skeptical of the show, to tell you the truth, and I guess, if I really think about it, I would say that I was one of them. After all, I think there is a lot to be concerned about when it comes to the show. For starters, I think it is a little odd for them to be making a midquel, because let's be honest, if you ask anybody what they were interested in seeing next in terms of Stranger Things content, it'd probably be something to do with either a prequel or some sort of sequel. If it wasn't one of those things, it would be a disconnected spin-off series that's in a different place with different characters but set to run somewhat concurrently with the mainline show, with maybe a couple of references tossed in for good measure to get people pointing at the screen all excited. I don't know if this was ever in the works or if it was just a confirmed fake leak, but at one point rumours were going around that there was going to be a spin-off set in Tokyo or something in the 80s. It's not something I ever found to be hugely compelling, to tell you the truth, and so I'm not fussed it came to nothing, but still, I felt it was miles ahead of a midquel. Because the reality is that any sort of midquel is often going to feel a bit out of place, in that it never gets brought up in the main storylines or whatever because it was made afterwards and retroactively changed things. Sometimes this can really work well and adds to stories, fleshes out characters, and can even help to fill in the occasional plot hole from the original work, but at the same time, I think it opens up a lot of potential plot holes of its own. I mean, let's not forget that in Season 3 it's made perfectly clear that there hasn't been any sort of monster attack or contact from the Upside Down until Billy gets possessed and the events of Season 3 start to unfold. But now, with this new story where strange happenings are taking place, it throws that vibe out the window. So now we start to venture into potentially non-canon territory, which I find to be a little bit frustrating, or at least I did. When I was first thinking about all of these things, I was massively negative, but the time since I watched the announcement trailer and thought about it a bit more, I came to the realization that maybe I was taking it a little bit too seriously. In the end, this is meant to be a fun little cartoon that's using the characters and setting of the original franchise, and so maybe instead of just being salty at if it exists, I should treat it like an alternative universe, like a what-if sort of storyline, and judge it on its merits. Oh, and just briefly, another thing that does make me a bit nervous is that obviously they're not going to be bringing back the original cast to be doing the voices for their younger animated selves, because let's be real, it wouldn't make sense to do so. All of them will have largely aged out of being able to play their role for their seasons 2 to 3 selves. After all, it was filmed in 2018, and that was for Season 3, where already there was a notable age jump despite the story having only pushed forward 9 or so months. Since this would be closer to Season 2 than Season 3, it would be even worse, because Season 2 was filmed in late 2016 to 2017. It would simply sound wrong and past the point of ridiculousness, and then I also simply doubt they're going to want to have to spend the money on the actual actors when they could easily cash in on the Stranger Things name and use sound-alike voice actors. For that very same reason, I doubt that any of the actual actors for the adult characters are going to be making an appearance in this show either, because it doesn't make any financial sense. I will admit that this does frustrate me at first, but after a while, so long as the voices are somewhat similar, you're able to get on with things. I just really hope that, as I said, the voice actors that they hired don't end up sounding so wildly different that it sucks me out of the story. Okay, so this in turn brings us to the announcement trailer, which we're going to go through now. The trailer begins with an interview with the Duffer brothers where they talk about how when they were first asked what they'd like to do in terms of an extended Stranger Things universe, this is one of the first things that came to mind. Does anybody else sort of shake their heads at this though? It very much feels like a too little, too late sort of situation from Netflix, seeing as it was only a couple of months ago that it was announced the Duffer brothers had signed an exclusive 4-year contract to make content for Paramount, and so any future stuff they work on is going to be Paramount Plus exclusive and not for Netflix. In hindsight, considering how long it's taken to get the full release of 5 seasons of Stranger Things, maybe they should have capitalized on the hype a whole lot sooner than this and started pushing out a couple of spin-offs in the earlier days. Now we're getting the first ever spin-off after the show's huge finale, which in turn might cause a big audience interest drop-off, and not only that, this is the only spin-off that will have the original creators involved because they're leaving to go to a completely different company, whilst Netflix owns the IP for Stranger Things. I don't know, I just think that if Netflix wanted to be able to milk this franchise properly, they should have been making these moves years and years ago, because let's be real, Stranger Things Things has been a pop culture phenomenon for close to 10 years by this point, and it's only now when it's all winding down and thus the hype is going to peak and then decline that they're trying to make this happen. For me, this just doesn't make any sense, but once again, I have to try to disconnect from this sort of thinking and take it as it comes. The Duffers then go on to say that the idea behind all of this was to try to evoke the feeling of a 1980s cartoon, whilst we get some concept art of the various different Stranger Things characters in various stages of completion. Now, don't get me wrong, I think that these initial stills that we see are really awesome and all, but like they said, they're trying to evoke the feeling of an 80s cartoon, and yet that's not what I'm getting from this at all in terms of the visual style. Maybe they meant that they're trying to evoke the tone of an 80s cartoon in its story and presentation beyond the visuals. Guess we'll have to wait and see when it comes out. As for the content of some of this concept art, at first we see a couple of sketches of the characters, and then we have a look at one of the potential villains/monsters. Since it does feel as if there's going to be some alternate universe, I do wonder if they're just going to say screw it and have the Upside Down and all that sort of thing play a part in the show, because this has always been the source of the show's darker elements. They're clearly going to want to have and include otherworldly threats and monsters, and we even have one here in this concept art with Mike and Eleven hiding from this skull monster thing wearing a big coat. The only thing is, though, that this artwork's presenting this character in a completely different way than they did the Demogorgon, Demodogs, Mind Flayer, or even Vecna. It's mostly the clothes, but also the monsters of the Upside Down are these sort of weird, fleshy plant creatures, whereas this one seems rather different, with a completely different vibe. In that first piece of concept art as well, they do have this red glow in the sky, which is reminiscent of the Upside Down and the red lightning they have there, so at this moment I'm kind of stumped on what they're doing, to tell you the truth. In the very next artwork though, they have the party all together, and by the looks of it, the grounds open up beneath their feet to reveal a whole lot of monsters that are more in the vein of what we've seen from Stranger Things traditionally. That being said, I'm still not all that sure they're going to be going in this direction with the story, and I think they might simply be facing some sort of different otherworldly threat in the series. Then again, I just read the tiny little blurb that comes along with the YouTube video release, and it did say the words, "something survived in 85, which I think is probably a reference to something, or a group of somethings being able to survive without the connection to the gateway of the Upside Down. I mean, this could also be some sort of misdirect, but I don't think it is, because at what point does it become a bit ridiculous that this little town in Indiana is the focal point for all the supernatural happenings across the world? Maybe having something beyond Vector and the Upside Down would at a certain point feel like it's just taken the piss. At this point, the Duffers talk about how animation will allow the creative team to go wild and do their thing with no limits. They're not going to be held back by the constraints of a live action production, and I will say that this is something that intrigues me, as Stranger Things has never really been shy about going nuts with what's going on visually. We've had the Demogorgon ripping open tears in reality, the Demodog tunnels, the Mind Flayer going inside Will, the flesh monster from season 3, and that's just off the top of my head. I'm not really sure how much farther you can push things overall, but at the same time, I'm very excited to find out. Honestly, the more and more I'm able to disconnect from the care about it being canon or a spin-off alternate universe, the more excited I'm becoming. We have a few shots of the animators doing their thing for the camera, before we get to have some look at the actual footage of the show beyond just concept art. Okay, from what I can see, I actually do rather like the style they're going with, although I have to say, it looks like no 80s cartoon I have ever taken a look at, that's for sure. Instead, it looks like a trailer for a Telltale game from back in the golden age when they were churning out franchise tie-ins like nothing else. I get that they're trying to channel that 80s nostalgia with this, but instead it's actually hitting me with some early 2010s nostalgia. And for that alone, I'm on board with this right now. We see them cycling in the snow, and then interestingly, we see Nancy driving them around with the party all piled in the back, and then Mike riding shotgun. This in turn made me realize that we have the chance to have some interesting character matchups we rarely get to see play out a little on screen. Yeah, it would have been nice to have some of these moments play out in the actual live action show, but better late than never, and I preferred it in an animated spin-off than not at all. Some of these just from this car scene could be Nancy and Mike, who despite being siblings, have extremely minimal interactions across the seasons, with a few limited lines of dialogue. They even had this one scene where they promise to keep each other in the loop and have no secrets, and then they continue to not be relevant at all to each other's storylines. I think that one would be a really fun one to explore. And then in the middle of the car we see Al hugging Lucas with Dustin on the other side of them, and that's another set of dynamics I feel hasn't really been touched on since season 1. Al doesn't really appear with them in season 2, and then in 3 and 4 her storylines are extremely disconnected from Lucas and Dustin, and so I think it would be fun to see how that dynamic could play out and what their interactions could be like. Then at the back of the car we have Will sitting with Max, and this is also one that I think has a lot of fun story potential given Will's meeker and sweet personality in the earlier seasons, with Max being a lot more forceful and dominant. I really hope that they think outside the box for this show and don't go back to the normal groupings and dynamics, because let's be real, we've already seen all of that before. The creators then confirmed the show is going to take place between seasons 2 and 3, so in either January or February of 1985, and that nothing is quite as the characters thought it was. Here we see Mike heading into his basement where he takes a look at the photo of him and Al at the snowball, which I think is very cute, before we see one of the monsters running away from this dude in a hazmat suit with what seems to be a flamethrower. I guarantee that this guy is gonna get eaten. The monster itself seems like a bit of a spin on the Upside Down style, where they're these strange plant-like creatures, and so I'm guessing there's either going to be some other tear in the walls between the worlds that 11 needs to close, or there's going to be some sort of new creature from the Upside Down, or a group of creatures that's able to survive without the open connection, and so they have to hunt them down before they destroy Hawkins or something along those lines. We then finish off with a little bit of a hype up by the head creator, and a couple more clips that don't really show anything other than the party doing their thing, and going on the hunt, but no action or deeper reveals. We then learn that it's coming sometime in 2026 as the video ends, but no solid release date just yet. Okay, so yeah, I started off really skeptical, but I think they've really won me over here. Yes, it could end up being terrible or have some problems, but so far so good. I think it looks really amazing, and the very bare bones plot we have so far has me intrigued, and so with all that being said, these have just been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What did you think of the announcement? Did you like the look of it? Has it gotten you hyped up for the show? Maybe not? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.